You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 190. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
Learning leaders, and for our purpose, Christ-centered learning leaders, are going to find themselves in circumstances where there's uncertainty.
So today we're going to talk about the different ways that learning leaders navigate uncertainty when they're leading from self-protection or leading with grounded confidence. Another way that we might think about uncertainty is vulnerability. And before we go any farther, yes, some of this does relate to Dare to Lead. And so I want to invite you to join me for a 90-minute Zoom call on what's standing between you and courageous leadership. It's taking place on August 25th from 10:30 a.m. to noon. You can register at multiplyminis.org or head over to the show notes page for the direct link. You can find that at transformingmission.org/podcast. And once again, you're looking for episode 190.
Episode 190 already?
Yeah.
That's today.
It makes me wonder, what will we do to celebrate episode 200?
Does that mean we're still 10 weeks away from that? So about Christmas time, we'll be at episode 200?
Oh gosh, don't say 10 weeks away and we're at Christmas. Okay, let's move on.
Well,
that went from exciting to panic.
Before we ever get to Christmas, they do have an opportunity to do that Dare to Lead, what's standing between you and the courageous leadership in August. So thank you for reminding us of that.
You're welcome. So let's talk uncertainty.
Well, Sarah, you and I both know that uncertainty can creep into leadership in several different ways. Sometimes it looks like doubt. Sometimes it looks like the need to learn new skills, that we're at a place where we don't have all the skills that we need, so we need to learn new ones. Sometimes it just looks like decision fatigue. Sometimes we just have too many options, too many directions that we might want to go.
Okay, I need to tell a story on a 3-year-old here. So Zoe is a 3-year-old in my family. And when you ask Zoe, what do you want to eat? Now, seriously, don't ask a 3-year-old what they want to eat. Because for Zoe, her go-to food is Cheetos. And I'm not even sure if you can count Cheetos as food, but Cheetos. Now, when she was asked, she had too many options. We were having pizza for dinner. And so there was pizza, there was salad, there were breadsticks, there was cookies and pie, and of course, there were Cheetos. Cheetos were predictable. Now, you're not 3, but it is amazing to me how quickly we regress to the comfortable and the familiar. And that's exactly what Cheetos were for dear Zoe.
So the question is, when you're uncertain, what do you do when you don't know what to do? So maybe you ask some wise leaders for input, people that you trust.
Or maybe you pause and, not maybe, I hope that you'll pause and listen to God in prayer. And what I mean by that is, don't tell God what the outcome is that you want, but stop and listen and ask yourself, what are you hearing? And when people say, well, how do you hear God and what does that even look like? For me, it's reading the scriptures and then reflecting on the scriptures prayerfully. It's not going to the scripture and finding the scripture that I want so that it tells me exactly what I want to hear, but it's the devotion that is planned for today that I spend a little bit more time on reading and pausing to reflect on, okay, what's this saying to me right now in this moment?
What I'm hearing you say, Sarah, is that pausing and listening to God in prayer is already part of a pattern of your life. So you've just not, in that uncertainty, you haven't just started doing that. It's part of what you've been doing all along.
Right. But it might be that in the midst of that pattern, you spend more time listening, more time pausing than you might normally if you're in a time of uncertainty. At least that's how it works for me.
So related to the two that we've already mentioned, we hope you have relationships with people enough that you can consult some trusted friends who will tell you the truth. I like this saying. I think I've said it before. The truth will set you free, even if you don't like it. So you need to be surrounded by some people who will actually love and care for you enough to tell you the truth. So maybe you consult trusted friends.
Yeah, and what we've listed there might not happen in that exact order. It might be that you also grab a journal and write it out. I know Tim and I have talked about this before on the podcast. Some of us think by writing, some of us think by talking. If you are a think by writing person, you might journal. If you're a think by talking, you might talk to someone important in your life that we've already named. You might journal or you might talk to your spouse. But what I want to say here is recognize that not everyone in your life is going to offer you the best advice. Because your spouse loves you and probably is less excited about any risks or new adventures or uncertainty that you're experiencing, they're probably also going to do everything that they possibly can to make it go away, to, make somebody the villain, get mad at somebody who isn't doing something that's giving you an air of uncertainty around you. There's a place for conversation with your spouse. Please don't hear me say, don't talk to your spouse. When you come home from work and the question is, how was your day? Yes, have the conversation. But when push comes to shove, decision-making or leadership by marriage consent, I would say is futile, unhelpful, and or can get tangled in the day-to-day reality of life together. I'm saying all of that to say proceed with caution. And no, I'm not saying hide things from your spouse. Just recognize what you're doing and ask when you're not certain if someone is venting or asking for your opinion. There's a difference. There are many, many conversations and marital disputes that happen because the difference between those two, venting or asking your opinion, is not discerned well, and nobody even asks. Now, we need both of those things. Learning leaders and wise spouses, says the single female who's on this podcast, communicate if they're venting or asking for advice. Your response is going to differ. That's why I say all of that. So I'm going to exit the marital counseling piece, and I think Tim might have something to add about friendship.
Oh, I'm so glad you took the marital piece, because I just said you need to have some trusted friends that you consult. But you have to understand, too, that sometimes the friends you talk to may not understand really what you're talking about, and you're not going to get a clear understanding or be able to navigate the uncertainty. Because one of the things we know is friendship ties are stronger than our missional work. People are going to side with you more as a friend, or they're going to side with somebody behind your back because of friends than they are with your uncertainty.
Yeah. So there are a few things that you can do. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper into this, because uncertainty is a part of learning. And when you don't know what to do, and you're trying to figure out what do you do when you don't know what to do, we need to remember that uncertainty, and I'm going to translate that also to vulnerability, is a part of learning. So you may have heard this said in other ways and at other places, there's something called the learning ladder. It's also called a learning matrix, or the 4 stages of learning. Back in the 70s, a man by the name of Noel Birch developed this ladder, and it's been adapted by several other people. But it highlights 2 factors that affect our thinking as we learn something new: our consciousness, or our awareness, and our skill level, our level of competence. So if I were to say to Tim right now, tell me about the first sermon that you preached and the last sermon that you preached, his level of awareness and competence would be at 2 different places. He's shaking his head yes.
It's true. Yes, you are correct.
And for any of the pastors listening, when you think about your first sermon, you know exactly what I'm referring to there. So according to this model, we move through these 4 levels as we build our competence in a new skill. We start off being unconsciously incompetent. We don't even know that we don't have this skill or that we need to learn it. We're unconsciously incompetent. The second stage is consciously incompetent. We recognize that we don't have the skill and that we need to learn the skill. And then we move to a place of conscious competence. This is where most of us start feeling comfortable because now we have the skill. We've moved from that incompetence and we're now becoming more competent. And then the last stage is unconsciously competent. We don't know that we have the skill, but we don't focus on it because it's so easy to us. This is one, and Tim, you and I have had this conversation over and over again throughout the years about strategic thinking. You and I don't need a manual to follow to think strategically. It is just who we are. It is how we are wired. And we can put things together in a pretty quick fashion and see the path forward because we're unconsciously competent. We don't think about, oh, now is the time to strategically think. we just naturally do it. So in those places, this is where, to use another example, when people say you never forget how to ride a bike, when you get on a bike and you just start pedaling and you know intuitively where the brake handles are, that's another example of unconscious competence. Now, it's been so long since I've been on a bicycle that I probably would feel consciously incompetent when I got on a bicycle. But you get the point. Now, uncertainty creeps in at the consciously incompetent part of the ladder. And I'm going to put a graphic on the show notes page that you can go in and look at so that you can see this visually for those of you that want something to look at. And it also creeps into cultures that are armored. Now, in the work that I do with Dare to Lead, the point is to become daring, courageous leaders where we lead from a place of grounded confidence. But what gets in the way is when we lead from a place of self-protection, or what we call armored leadership. So that uncertainty, sometimes what we do, and we all do this, is we armor up, we self-protect. And that's not helpful. So when it comes to being learning leaders, let's talk about how this ends up playing out so that you know what you can do and what you need to watch out for as you're trying to figure out what to do.
So Sarah, would it be, I'm trying to be competent here, would it be right to say that in our work or in a church culture that the primary value is being a knower or being right? Not knowing, incompetence, uncertainty are all viewed as a weakness. So if I show any vulnerability, I'm really showing that I'm weak. Is that part of what we're talking about?
Yeah, you're not saying that is what we should value. You're saying when that is the current reality of
right,
what.
When that's right, correct.
Yeah. So when when not knowing and being right are what's valued, there's going to be a whole host of uncertainty that flows through the culture because no one's going to take risks and no one's going to ask questions because they're going to be viewed, they feel as though they're going to be viewed as weak or incompetent. So they don't do anything. Here's how I see this playing out. Then people don't collaborate. They don't stop and ask the questions. They build up a silo around their little turf, and they protect that turf with everything that they have. They don't share information. And I'm sorry if this sounds negative, it's just reality. But they don't share information that will help other people do their job, even though they recognize other people need that information. They don't share it because knowledge is power and being right is what gives you status in that organization. Does that make sense?
It does. And what I'm thinking is that much of my ministry I haven't said this for a while, 48 years that I've been in ministry. If I were preparing for a sermon and it was a story that I was going to use, I was very conscious not to tell that story in a Bible study or some other time and hope that people didn't read the same things I was reading because I didn't want them to know the story before I told it. Because that was the information I wanted to share, and me sharing the information put me in a place of knowing and of some kind of influence and maybe power.
Yeah, and I would say
so. That's part of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I would say what, unfortunately, you were modeling there, and unfortunately, it happens many Sundays in pulpits. Is the value there is being a knower and being right. That instead of working to get it right, so think about instead a sermon that someone comes to the pulpit or the platform and says, this was a really hard sermon for me to write, and here's why. And they lead you on a journey of struggling through what the scripture text said and how to help the people that were there for worship to embrace that scripture and apply it to their own life. You have two very different experiences in those.
Right.
And so when you're at the place of being consciously incompetent, you're aware that you don't know something. Often we try to do what you just described. We try to prove to people how much we know. And it's not until we get to the place of being consciously competent that we can say, okay, I got this. and we're more willing to, and I mean this in a good way now, step into that vulnerability and do more of what I said in terms of saying, this was a tough sermon for me to prepare. And using that as a launch piece into what the message is for that Sunday to take people on that journey.
So to come back to what we've just been talking about, not that you need to talk about me, but that conscious incompetence can be a powerful place to start if we're willing to step into that vulnerability. I mean, we can get into it down the line, but it can be a powerful place because we're saying, I don't know all there is to know about this, but we're on a journey together.
Oh, absolutely. And in the context of what we're talking about this month, I hope that we're all living in that conscious incompetence in some area of our leadership. Because if we're not, we're probably not learning. And we're probably not growing.
So to prove the point that we're talking about, it's not a bad thing to acknowledge that you are consciously incompetent. That is a good place to be able to start so that you can learn forward as a learning leader that you're growing.
Absolutely. Now, if you say to people, I am now consciously incompetent, they're going to look at you like you have three heads. Oh. So here's how I would translate that.
I didn't mean that. So
I know you didn't.
bail me out of this. Bail me out of this in confidence. Sarah.
I know you didn't mean that. I'm just saying that for our listeners. Once again, don't try and sound smart. Here's what you say. It's 3 simple words. 4 if you take out the contraction. I don't know. Those 3 words give people the power to be on a journey together. And when you are uncertain, saying I don't know is an absolutely okay thing to do. Now, don't stop there. Take the next step and say, okay, where can we find out? Who do we need to talk to? Who do we need to consult? What do we need to look up on Google, or what information reference do we have that we can explore? Because again, if you're holding on to knowledge and you think that that is the only thing that you bring, you're going to continue to cultivate a culture of uncertainty. Instead, cultivate a culture where you explore the unknown together, that it's okay to say, I don't know, and let's find out together. How many Bible studies have you led, Tim, in your 48 years of ministry, that someone has looked at you and asked you a question with the expectation that you know exactly every word in every verse in Scripture and what it means and what the original Greek or Hebrew means? I mean, the Bible's too big, and yet that's what people expect. And I can remember some of the first times that I would say to people, well, I don't know. And especially in my first years of ministry, because if you don't know, I did not have a long runway in my life as a follower of Jesus before I responded to a call to ministry, which is insane and crazy, and I would not recommend it, and I have no idea why they ever accepted me to seminary at that point in time in my life. But there was a lot that I didn't know. And part of what I realized very quickly was, especially with the teenagers and their parents that I was working with, when I said, I don't know, let's find out together, it created a way for me to equip them to find the answers for themselves and to explore the Scriptures themselves and to learn how to read the Scriptures and think and reflect on what they were reading and to compare different translations and do all of the things that we learn to do with the Bible. So yeah, conscious uncompetence is a great place to begin learning. It's the I don't know, let's find out.
Right. I appreciate you giving a Bible study example, because once I learned in my ministry that it was okay to say I didn't know, I also learned to invite people in by saying, why don't you research that and let's talk about that next time?
Yeah.
Now, you just said it in a different way, which was much better than me saying, I don't know, why don't you do it? Really, what I was saying was, we can learn together, and I want to know. And if you'll look that up, I'd be willing to learn from you.
Yeah. And so again, back to our theme, learning leadership, it's not a one-way street. And the theme that we're playing with here, in the midst of uncertainty, what do you do? We're playing with the idea that, being a knower and being right, that there's perceived power in that, and yet it's a false sense of power, because you're not then empowering and equipping other people. And that's what every leader needs to be doing.
In our conversation, Sarah, one of the things that I always come back to, but you have helped me understand, is that if we have to know all things and be right in all things, it really hinders our relationships. It begins to prohibit healthy relationships.
Yeah. And now I don't want someone's face to pop into your head when I say this, but we all have people in our lives that they're never wrong, even when they're wrong. They're not fun people to be around. And they're not people that, at least for me, I want to invest a whole lot of energy in. And I certainly don't want to invest a whole lot of energy on something that we're learning together, because they will always have to be right. And especially if it is something that I am consciously incompetent about, if you are always right, that does not help my uncertainty. That does not provide a stabilizing force. What I need is someone to say, yep, I remember doing that too. It's okay. And by the time this airs, now I'm going to start sounding like you, Tim. August 1st, it's 20 years of full-time ministry for me. And when I think about along those 20 years, the people that I have had the privilege of coming alongside as they are stepping into full-time ministry, whether it's ordained ministry or lay ministry, those moments of, yep, we've all been there. It's okay. So what'd you learn? What will you do different? We need to hear that, yeah, we're not alone. We're not the only ones that have made that mistake, and that you're going to survive it. And you'll probably learn something from it along the way.
May I say that it's okay that they have my permission as a district superintendent, that they don't have to be the smartest person in the room always.
Yeah. And if you are in a place that you think the only value that you bring is knowledge, and you have to be the smartest person in the room, please work on changing that culture.
Well, part of what I was thinking about saying that is that it stops us from building those authentic relationships. It puts us directly in a place where we have to continue to be something that we're not. And that doesn't allow us to be authentic as well as vulnerable.
Right. And so another way to say what you're saying, Tim, is don't feel like you have to have it all figured out going into the room.
Correct. And
that leads to another thing that you can think about when you're in the midst of uncertainty, and that, not just think about it, but do it. And that's asking for help. And because asking for help is an act of courage. And I would say if you're a part of a culture that views asking for help as a weakness, work on changing the culture. And if you're uncertain or overwhelmed and can't ask for help, again, work on changing the culture. Or I'm going to go as far as to say, leave the organization. Because this is a big one for learning leaders. If it is not a place that you can ask for help, then you're not going to have the support, and we're going to get to this in the next episode. You're not going to have the support to continue growing. Asking questions is essential to learning. Asking for help is normal behavior. It's expected behavior when we're leading from a place of grounded confidence.
As I've said many times, Sarah, as we've been on these episodes of LeaderCast, I wish I'd had this when I was starting out or learning to be a leader. And it's not that I have gotten to the place where I am a leader. I just now know that I'm a learning leader. I just wish there was a time where I wasn't the smartest person in the room, or I wasn't allowing other people to offer what they had to offer, where I was defending myself when I knew that I didn't even know what I was defending myself for, but because I had to be the one who had all the knowledge and the information.
I don't know that we had examples of leaders who led in the way that we're talking about. I think the view of leadership has often been the person in positional leadership has the power and has all the information. Now, we all know that that's a bunch of boo crap, but that's how we lived. And that was what was modeled. And so you might not have had it, I might not have had it, but we do still have an opportunity right now to lead people in a way that recognizing that uncertainty is a normal part of life. It's going to happen. And it's certainly going to happen in leadership if you're continuing to learn and grow and help other people do that. It's not all going to be, neat and tidy and tied up in a bow. And I don't know how, as people of faith, we can say, well, let me say that differently. How I would say it is my certainty comes from being a follower of Jesus. There's a heck of a lot of uncertainty still in that, but that's where I land at the end of the day. At the end of the day, regardless of what I do or don't do, I know that God still loves me. Regardless of what I said or left unsaid, God still loves me. That's where the groundedness comes for me and comes as a Christ-centered leader. All of the things that we're adding around that are tactics, are things that we can model for people so that we can create more of a learning culture so that people can continue to grow.
So, Sarah, one of the things you were saying in relationship to what you just said was that you have to ask questions to learn. And one of the ways that we've talked about that is just to stay curious. That I'm going back to what I know and don't know. And that is, you may not know enough to know the answers or the best part or the right questions to ask. You may not even know, but if you're curious, you learn the questions you may need to ask. And I spent lots of years in meetings when I thought I didn't know something and I just stayed quiet. I didn't speak up to ask the questions that even if, I've always disliked when somebody says there are no stupid questions. Well, we do know that there are stupid questions, but if you're curious, it's not a stupid question. Sure. Help me out again, Sarah.
I'm thinking about being a pastor and going to a new appointment, and being a pastor going to a new appointment where there's a different dynamic. So it might be that you're now stepping into actually having a staff around you, and the opportunity presents itself for hiring someone. If you don't have a clue how to go about hiring someone, you start to get curious, right? You ask the people who are currently there, how have you hired people in the past? What has the process been? You reach out to other colleagues. Where do you post jobs? Where have you found the people that you need? You get curious and start asking questions of people who have done it before. It goes back to what we said right at the beginning. You still might not know all of the steps that are involved in doing that, but you got curious. And it just begins with a simple question.
You always have me thinking about something, so you've got me curious now. And that is in any appointment, but especially when you're starting, one of the ways that you can use this very technique of being curious is always ask not only what are the expectations, but what are the unspoken expectations. And when you're asking that question, you are curious, but you're also helping people who are making assumptions in the midst of their own unconscious confidence that they have to think about what they really need and want, not only in a leader, but in the direction of their congregation.
Yeah.
And so as a learning leader, again, you can use your own place in leadership to learn and to grow, to become even a greater leader by helping others step into places they've not been before. And it's just by asking questions. It's by being curious. That's one of the things that I've learned from you, Sarah.
Yeah. To wrap up what we've just been talking about, when uncertainty creeps in as a leader, ask yourself whether you and your organization value being a learner and getting it right, or being a knower and being right. Being a learner and learning leadership is courageous leadership. It's what we've been talking about this entire year and what we've invited people to come on and share their stories with you about. Being a knower and needing to be right, I'm going to put this in biblical terms. Don't be a donkey. When you're a learning leader, uncertainty is a part of leadership. So as Tim said, get curious, ask questions, ask for help, and lean into getting it right over being right. So Tim, what are your final thoughts for our listeners?
Oh, Sarah, I've been confessing how I have either misstepped in leadership or grown in leadership throughout this podcast, this episode. I just want to invite people into the journey. And the journey is not based upon what you know. It's based upon how you're going to learn and grow in your leadership, and allowing each situation to have its own value as you learn to navigate the uncertainty. And that's really the invitation that we have for all of you learning leaders today.
That's a good word. So here are your loosely two questions for write it down, talk it out. Number one, what do you need to get curious about in your leadership? What questions can you ask of your team or other quote unquote experts to reduce that uncertainty? And then number two, who is the last person that you asked for help? Reach out and thank them for their role in your leadership journey. Now, Tim and I talked a lot today about different conversations and asking questions and getting curious. And we did a whole series way back in episodes 55 through 59 about rumbling with vulnerability. So if you want to learn more about what that's all about, head back to episodes 55 through 59, and I'll link that on the show notes page, which once again is transformingmission.org/podcast, or go directly to the episode at transformingmission.org/190. And remember, if you're interested in learning more about Dare to Lead and what's standing in between you and courageous leadership, the link to register for that on August 25th is also on the show notes page. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.